a wealthy and conceited man takes on a daring wager that obliges him to marry a plus-sized woman who defies his superficial ideals. 6 months down the road, he's left stunned and heartbroken by the shocking revelation she unveils. Henry Caldwell, a wealthy and self-assured man, was no stranger to success, whether in business or personal affairs, and thrived on competition. But when his good friend Stephen issued a bold dare at an extravagant Manhattan gathering, Henry was intrigued. With a sly grin, Stephen tossed out the challenge. "Let's see if you can handle this one, Henry. I bet you wouldn't dare marry a woman who's not your typical type." Henry, who was known for dating slender, glamorous women, was caught off guard. Still, always eager to prove his mettle, Henry raised an eyebrow and asked, "And what's the reward?" Stephen, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, raised his champagne glass and replied, $1 million to the winner, but here's the catch. You've got to marry her and stay together for at least 6 months. Driven by the thrill of competition and the lure of financial gain, Henry agreed on the spot. The woman Stephen had in mind was Claire Bennett's, someone who didn't fit society's conventional beauty ideals. Henry had never met her, but to him, this was just another game to win. A few days later, Henry received more information about Claire. She was independent, confident, and had a mind of her own, qualities quite unlike the women Henry was accustomed to. This only piqued his curiosity further. Used to being in control, he wondered how he'd manage someone who wouldn't bow to his every whim. Their first encounter took place at an upscale restaurant. As soon as Claire walked in, Henry noticed how vastly different she was from anyone he'd ever known. She wasn't fazed by the opulent surroundings or by Henry's commanding presence. Instead, she locked eyes with him, unshaken. "You must be Henry Caldwell," Claire said firmly, as she took her seat. "And you must be Claire Bennett's," Henry replied, offering a polite, calculated smile as he extended his hand. She paused briefly, before shaking it with a solid grip, making it clear she wasn't to be underestimated. "Let's not waste time," Claire began, her voice straightforward and direct. "I'm well aware of the bet, the rules, and what's at stake." Henry was surprised by her bluntness, though he didn't let it show. "And yet, you still decided to meet?" he asked, genuinely curious about what drove her. Claire paused for a moment, then responded, "I have my reasons. Don't mistake me for a fool, Henry. 6 months might not seem like much time, but a lot can shift during that period. If you think you can control or manipulate me, you're wrong." Henry gave a knowing smile. Claire turned out to be far more challenging than he expected, making things all the more intriguing for him. After their initial meeting, Henry found himself increasingly captivated by her. She was unlike anyone he'd come across before. What caught his attention the most was her lack of fear. It intrigued him, and maybe even earned his respect. As days went by, Henry couldn't stop thinking about the next move. He was used to being the one in control, but now it seemed Claire had her own strategy. Their second meeting was at a modest cafe, a far cry from the fancy places Henry typically dined. Claire had picked the location, and Henry, intrigued, went along with it. He wanted to figure out who she was and why she had agreed to something that felt like a temporary marriage contract. When he arrived, Claire was already there, sipping tea with a calm, collected smile. She greeted him with warmth this time, in contrast to the chill of their first encounter, but still carried herself with that same unshakable confidence. "I thought you preferred 5-star restaurants," Claire teased as Henry sat down. "Sometimes it's good to break the routine," Henry replied, trying to sound casual. Though he felt slightly off balance, they made small talk for a while, exchanging pleasantries, but Claire soon cut to the chase. "If we're really going through with this, there are a few things I want to be clear about," she said, setting her teacup down. I'm not interested in your wealth or your luxurious lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and I'm walking away the same person I was before this began." Henry studied her closely. He knew she was being truthful. Claire wasn't the type to use marriage as a stepping stone into a higher social circle, like others might. "So, what do you want, Claire?" Henry asked. His curiosity piqued. "Independence," she replied, without missing a beat. "I want you to understand that even though we're agreeing to this, you won't control me. I have my own life, and that won't change just because of a temporary marriage." Henry grinned. Although it wasn't quite the response he had anticipated, Claire, wanting this level of freedom, didn't bother him. To him, getting married was simply a technicality to win the bet. If she wanted to hold on to her independence, that didn't really matter to him. "All right," Henry agreed. 6 months. After that, they would part ways. Claire studied him for a moment, as if trying to make sure he was really on board with the terms. She had taken on this challenge with a specific plan, determined to make sure things played out on her terms. Deep down, she suspected Henry might try to twist the situation to his advantage, but she trusted in her own resolve to stay strong. They parted on amicable terms, with both sides clear about their roles. Claire would remain independent, and Henry would treat the marriage as nothing more than a formality. But as the days went by and the wedding approached, Henry started to realize that this whole arrangement might not be as straightforward as he'd originally thought. The wedding itself was cold and emotionless, more like the signing of a business deal than a celebration. Henry Caldwell, always thinking strategically, already saw himself as the winner. He was sure that the next 6 months would fly by, and that Claire, no matter how headstrong, would eventually surrender to the lavish life he was offering. Immediately after the ceremony, Henry brought Claire to his sprawling penthouse right in the heart of New York. The massive glass windows showcased the city lights, and the space was filled with the finest, most exclusive furnishings. To Henry, this was the real battleground, where he would win Claire over with the sheer weight of his wealth. But from the moment Claire walked in, she made it clear she wouldn't be easily swayed. She kept her distance, and the look she gave Henry wasn't one of admiration, but of defiance. 6 months, Henry, not a day more," she said firmly, moving toward one of the large windows, gazing out at the city, unimpressed by the luxury surrounding her. Henry smirked, still sure of himself. He was familiar with this type of resistance at the start. Every woman he'd been with eventually succumbed to his charm and wealth. In his mind, Claire wouldn't be any different. During the first few days after their marriage, Henry went all out trying to impress her. He showered Claire with lavish gifts, expensive jewelry, high-end clothes, and extravagant vacations, expecting her to embrace the luxurious life he wanted her to live. But to his annoyance, she rejected it all. Claire remained steadfast in her simple, humble way of life, refusing to be swayed by the allure of wealth. "I don't need these things, Henry," she would say in a calm voice, which only fueled his frustration. It gnawed at him. Henry, who was used to getting whatever he wanted, was facing defiance like never before. What started as a challenge quickly became personal. It wasn't about the bet anymore. Now, it was about his pride. He became determined to win Claire over. He had to show her that, in the end, he was in charge. That's when he upped his game. He began preventing her from going to work, insisting, "You don't need a paycheck anymore," or "Your job is to be my wife now." When she pushed back, he'd delay important meetings she had scheduled. Henry controlled every detail, timing, circumstances, manipulating things to keep her under his thumb. Yet Claire remained unyielding. She stood firm against Henry's efforts, and that only fueled his obsession to break her. Their marriage turned into a battleground. Tensions surfaced in everyday conversations, where Claire's sharp, well-aimed remarks deflected Henry's attempts to belittle or control her. On a particularly tense evening, Henry tried a different approach, one that was more emotionally charged. "I just don't get you, Claire," he said, looking at her with a mixture of frustration and confusion. "Any other woman would love to live this life of luxury, but you act like it's not enough. What do you really want?" Claire, who had stayed composed until that moment, finally raised her eyes, and the intensity behind them took Henry by surprise. "What do I want? I want respect, Henry. I'm not some pawn in your game. You think money gives you control over me, but you're wrong. Dignity and integrity aren't for sale. You have all these things, but you're hollow inside, and that's what you can't handle." Her words struck him like a blow. For the first time, Henry realized he might be losing more than just control. Claire wasn't just pushing back against his influence. She was unraveling the image he had carefully crafted over the years, and that terrified him. No one had ever stood up to him like this, and the fact that Claire could see through his wealth and status left Henry feeling vulnerable. But instead of retreating, Henry tightened his control. He devised ways to corner Claire to make her understand that life would be much harder without him. He began cutting off her connections, closing opportunities that could help her advance, and even sabotaged significant events she was working on. Still, Claire wasn't one to be easily shaken. Each time he struck, she got back up with even more resolve. She held on to her self-worth, refusing to let Henry dictate who she was. Then, one evening, Claire made her move. "Henry, you think you're in control, don't you?" she said with calculated calm. "But what you don't realize is that I have my own plan, and when the time is right, you'll understand that this whole game is about something far bigger than you can imagine." Henry froze, caught off guard. For the first time, he began to think he might have underestimated her, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of fear that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be the one to come out on top. The following weeks felt like walking a tightrope, the tension between them growing sharper with each passing day, ready to break. Henry, obsessed with maintaining control, tried everything to manipulate the outcome. But Claire remained unshaken. She was like a fortress he couldn't penetrate. Every move he made only seemed to solidify her inner strength, yet Henry found himself facing a new truth. As the days went by, he started to see her differently. It wasn't just about acknowledging her determination. It went deeper than that. She was doing something no other woman had managed before. She was breaking down his emotional barriers, and that made him uncomfortable, unsure of himself. For the first time, he began to view her, not as a pawn in his game, but as someone he genuinely wanted to understand. One night, after another intense argument, Henry sat alone in the spacious living room, staring out at the city skyline through the glass windows. The city lights used to fill him with a sense of power, but now they felt hollow. He couldn't shake the strange feeling creeping over him. Claire had only been his wife for 6 months. She was supposed to be just another part of his strategy, nothing more. Yet, the truth was undeniable. She was stirring something in him. The man who always kept his emotions in check was now feeling their weight. Claire saw right through Henry, and that left him feeling exposed. While Henry struggled with his swirling thoughts, Claire continued with her day-to-day life, seeming more distant as time passed. It was as though she was waiting for something, though he couldn't figure out what. There was an invisible barrier between them, something Henry couldn't tear down, and it gnawed at him. He wasn't sure if it was his pride or the fear of losing control, but Claire had a hold on him in ways he hadn't expected. "You've changed, Henry," Stephen, his friend who had made the bet during a casual dinner, pointed out. "Normally, you've got everything under control, but it looks like this one's giving you a real challenge," Stephen added, with a knowing grin. Henry forced a smile in response, though he couldn't deny the truth in Stephen's words. He didn't want to admit it, but things were shifting in a way he didn't like. That evening, Henry came home ready to end the mental tug-of-war. He needed to get Claire out of his head. He needed to remind himself that this was strictly a business arrangement, nothing more. Walking into the penthouse, he found Claire lounging on the couch, lost in a book, unaware of his arrival. "Can we talk?" Henry asked, breaking the heavy silence that had become their norm. Claire closed her book softly and looked up at him with a calm but focused gaze. "Sure," she said, as though she'd been expecting this moment. Sitting down across from her, Henry searched for the right words. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. He knew this wasn't just a business deal anymore. "What are we doing here, Claire?" he asked, his voice laced with a vulnerability that even surprised him. This started off as a game, a bet, but now, "I don't know anymore." Claire held his gaze for a few moments before answering. "I'm not playing, Henry. I never was." Her tone was even, yet full of meaning. "From the beginning, I entered this marriage for reasons that go beyond you. I don't care about the money or your need to be in control. There's more to this, and if you haven't figured that out by now, maybe it's time you did." Henry felt a knot tighten in his chest, as if she was letting him in on a secret he still couldn't grasp. Frustration bubbled up inside him. "I know you've got your secrets, Claire, but what kills me is that the harder I try to understand you, the more out of control I feel. And I hate it." He stood up abruptly, unable to sit any longer. Feeling the weight of his own confession pressing down on him, Claire remained composed, her eyes fixed on every one of his movements. She rose slowly, making her way toward him, stopping just inches from where he stood. Henry felt his pulse quicken. "Henry," she said, her voice soft and measured, "this isn't about power. You've spent your life trying to take control of everything and everyone. But with me, you'll have to understand that control doesn't always work. Sometimes, you just have to let things be." Henry gazed into her eyes, and for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar. A connection. It wasn't about strategy or winning. He saw Claire as she really was, not just another player in his game. "So, what is it you want?" he asked, his tone now gentle, barely above a whisper. Claire smiled, her smile full of mystery that sent a chill down his spine. "That's for you to figure out, Henry." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone to wrestle with his thoughts. Over the next few days, it felt like the distance between them widened. Yet in a strange way, Henry found himself feeling closer to Claire than he ever had before. He was consumed with trying to uncover what she was hiding, what her true motives were, and at the same time, he sensed he was losing control over himself. As much as he hated to admit it, Claire was shifting how he viewed the world, and the realization that she could impact him so profoundly scared him. 6 months of marriage were nearly up, but for Henry Caldwell, each day stretched into what felt like forever. Sleep eluded him. The growing sense that he was on the verge of discovering something life-changing left his stomach in knots. Claire had become a mystery he couldn't solve. She wasn't just the woman he'd wed as part of a dare. She was someone who knew something beyond his comprehension. His obsession with understanding Claire took over his life. He had tried every method to uncover the truth, but each answer seemed to lead to even more confusion. Henry brought in investigators, dug into her history, followed every clue. But it all felt like it had been carefully set up by Claire. It was as if she had been orchestrating the entire game from the start, always staying one step ahead. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Henry returned to the penthouse later than usual. The balcony light was on, and there was Claire, seated, gazing out over the city, like a queen surveying her realm. He knew tonight was the night when the truth would finally come out. Henry had the sense that she was ready to reveal what he'd been dying to learn. But the fear of what she might say made his throat tighten. As he moved closer, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the quiet room. Claire didn't turn around right away. The atmosphere was thick, as if both of them sensed something terrible was about to happen. "I need answers, Claire," Henry said, his voice steady, even though his heart pounded in his chest. "I can't deal with this anymore. You've got to tell me the truth." Claire let out a slow sigh and stood up from her chair, finally turning to face him. Her eyes, usually calm and calculating, now held an emotion Henry couldn't quite place. There was something different in her now, something dark and intense. "The truth, Henry?" she asked with a bitter smile, crossing her arms. "Are you sure you want to hear it?" He nodded without a second thought, but the tension between them thickened with every passing second. Henry readied himself for whatever was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for what Claire was about to say. "You don't even know who I am," she began, her voice as cold as ice. "You've always treated people like pieces on your chessboard, but this time, Henry, you were the one being played. I've been pulling the strings from the very start." A shiver ran down Henry's spine. The control he was always so sure of was slipping away before his eyes. He tried to speak, but Claire wasn't done. "Do you remember the name Bennett's?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "Of course you don't. People like you never remember." She took a step closer, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and sorrow. "My father owned a small business, barely making ends meet until you came along and destroyed it." Henry stepped back, his eyes wide, his mind racing to make sense of what she was saying. "What?" he stammered, confused. "What are you talking about?" Claire moved even closer, her voice now filled with fury and grief. "My father, Henry. He was a good man, trying to take care of us, until you showed up and took everything. You destroyed him, Henry. He lost it all, and it killed him." She paused, her voice cracking as tears filled her eyes. "He took his own life because of you, because of your empire and your ruthless ambition." The weight of her words hit Henry like a blow to the chest. He stood frozen as long-buried memories began to resurface. There had been countless deals, endless contracts, and so many lives affected by his selfish actions. He couldn't even recall every company he had crushed on his way to the top. But now, suddenly, it was all rushing back to him. "Claire," he tried to cut in, desperation evident in his voice, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "No," she shouted, her anger spilling over. "You have no idea what you've done. This isn't just about money, Henry. This is about ruined lives. You took my father from me, the only family I had left, and while you thrived, my mum and I drowned in debt and misery. You lived in luxury while we struggled to put food on the table." Henry was left speechless. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was stand there, stunned, as guilt weighed heavily on his chest. "But I had a plan," Claire continued, her tone now calmer, but still sharp with resentment. "When I found out about your little bet, I saw my opening. I approached you with intent. I agreed to the bet because I wanted you to feel just a taste of what I felt. I wanted you to know what it's like to be used, manipulated, and left with nothing." Henry felt his whole body shake. He had always believed he was in control, always convinced he'd come out on top. But now the roles were reversed. He was the one being played, and Claire held all the cards. "Claire," Henry tried again, but his voice came out weak. I didn't realize who you were." "No, Henry," Claire interrupted, stepping in closer, now face to face with him. You didn't know because you never bothered to care. You destroyed lives without a second thought. And now, I'm not here to ruin you, but to make sure you never forget what you did. I want you to feel the same pain you caused, and that pain, Henry, will follow you for the rest of your life. Her words hit him like a gavel coming down with finality. Henry faced something he had never experienced before, the real, unavoidable consequences of his actions. The crushing weight of guilt made him realize he had lost much more than a gamble. He had lost something he could never regain. Claire turned and walked away, the silence in the penthouse suffocating. Henry's legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed onto the couch, unable to find the words. All that was left was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Claire's words echoed in his mind, like a storm he could never escape. Every word that came from her lips tore apart, bit by bit, the world he believed he controlled. The woman he once thought he could dominate, a mere pawn in his grand scheme of power and manipulation, had just flipped the entire game on its head. For the first time in his life, Henry was at a complete loss for how to respond. For the first time, he felt powerless. But Claire didn't give him a moment to recover. After revealing the truth about her family's ruin and her father's tragic death, she left him standing alone in the room, consumed by his own guilt. Henry remained frozen, the air in the penthouse feeling suffocating, as if everything around him was crumbling. He wanted to run after her, to beg for forgiveness, to explain the unexplainable. But the reality was, no words would come. How could he possibly justify something so cruel, something that inflicted so much hurt? In the days following her bombshell, Claire did exactly what Henry feared the most. She shut him out completely. Her presence served as a constant reminder of his failure. She walked past him as if he were invisible, like his very existence was nothing more than a fleeting shadow. At breakfast, she sat in silence, barely glancing his way. Whenever he tried to speak, the words seemed to evaporate, unable to pierce the emotional barrier she had erected between them. Henry, a man who was always the center of attention, accustomed to commanding every room, now found himself ignored in his own home. The absence of attention was suffocating. Claire interacted with the staff and went about her own life, but when it came to Henry, it was as if he no longer existed. The weight of this forced silence began to tear apart the man he once thought he was. As she prepared to leave one morning, Henry called out desperately, "Claire, we need to talk." She stopped, but didn't turn around, simply adjusting her coat. The silence thickened, and Henry waited anxiously for a reaction. Any reaction. Even anger would have been better than this indifference. But Claire didn't say a word. She just walked out, gently closing the door behind her, leaving Henry haunted by the echo. A new kind of agony for Henry was the pain of someone ignoring him who he was beginning to see as more than just a rival. He was used to being the one in control, to always coming out on top. Now, it was her icy silence that was manipulating him. Every time she left him standing there, alone, the sense of helplessness deepened. And that was only the beginning. Claire didn't just stop at silence. She began chipping away at his confidence in small, deliberate ways. At the office, he started to pick up on the fact that important meetings were being moved around without any heads up. His decisions at work were suddenly being questioned, and projects he had championed started to unravel mysteriously. He had no doubt Claire was behind it all. Even though she never openly confessed, Henry could feel her influence everywhere, as if she were controlling the unseen forces that held his life together. At home, things had only gotten worse. Claire treated him with outright contempt, purposely distancing herself from any of his attempts to make things right. She stopped sharing meals with him and avoided talking unless it was small talk. Whenever he tried to approach her, she would respond with icy looks, as if he were nothing more than a bother. One evening, Henry found her sitting in the living room, engrossed in a book. It looked like a peaceful scene, but Henry knew better. It was a quiet snare. He sat on the couch, determined to try talking again. "Claire," he said softly, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "I know I've done terrible things. I know I've hurt you deeply, but can we please try to work through this? Can we just talk?" Claire slowly shut the book without even glancing his way. When she finally met his eyes, her expression was so cold it sent a chill through him. "Talk?" she echoed, letting out a bitter laugh. "You think there's anything left to discuss? You want words, Henry? After everything, words don't mean a thing." "I was wrong, Claire, I know that," Henry said, rising from the couch, edging closer to her, desperate to make some sort of connection. "I'd do anything to fix what I've done. I can change. I promise." At last, she looked him straight in the eye, her stare sharp, as if daring him to prove his words. "Change?" she repeated, standing up slowly. "Do you honestly think changing now can undo everything? Will it bring my father back? Will it erase all those years of suffering we endured because of you? No, Henry, it won't." She stepped closer, and Henry felt himself sink under the weight of her intense gaze. "What you're doing now isn't for me. It's for you. You'll carry the burden, this guilt, for the rest of your life." Henry stood there, speechless. For the first time, it hit him. There would be no quick fix, no easy forgiveness. He wanted to fight for something that could be mended, but Claire was far beyond any quick fix. In the days that followed, she only ramped up her punishments. Whenever Henry walked by, she gave him looks of pure disdain, and his frustration quickly morphed into desperation. He did everything he could to show her he was changing and that he wanted to improve, but each attempt was met with cold indifference or biting sarcasm. One evening, after a terrible day at work, where a key project had been sabotaged, Henry came home to find Claire on the phone, laughing. He caught snippets of her conversation and realized she was talking about his work decisions. He knew it was her. Claire was systematically undoing everything he'd worked so hard for in such a sneaky, calculated way that no one but him could see it, and she made him suffer in silence. When Claire hung up, Henry was already in the living room, waiting. He stared at her, his face a mix of exhaustion, suppressed anger and pain. "You're tearing everything apart, aren't you?" he said, his voice low, but clearly dripping with frustration. "At work, here at home, you're ruining my life." Claire glanced at him, her face blank, arms crossed. "Ruining your life?" she said with a raised eyebrow. "I'm just giving back what you gave. Don't worry, Henry. I won't destroy you financially. That would be too easy. I want you to live with the pain. I want you to feel every single loss, just like I did. I want you day after day to watch everything you've built fall apart and know that it's all your fault." Henry felt like the ground beneath him had vanished once more. It was a nightmare. He had always been the guy who won, the man who shaped other people's lives. Now, he was the target of a cold, calculated revenge. Claire didn't want to ruin him in one blow. She wanted him to suffer, bit by bit, with each small defeat, each dismissive glance, until he had nothing left but regret. As the weeks went by, Claire continued to punish and ignore him. Henry, once confident and cocky, now roamed the house like a shell of the man he used to be, desperately trying to earn forgiveness he knew would never come. He tried to make amends, but it never seemed to be enough. Stuck in a relentless cycle of remorse and suffering, he realized Claire had mastered the art of keeping him trapped in that cycle. But the worst was yet to unfold. One evening, Claire finally confronted him, her demeanor colder than anything Henry had ever witnessed before. She approached as he sat slumped on the couch, utterly drained, and spoke words that would haunt him forever. "Henry, you took something from me that I can never get back." Her tone was calm, but sharp enough to cut deep. "Now, I'm returning the favor, and you'll live with this for the rest of your life." With those words, Claire walked away, leaving him with nothing else to say. She didn't need to. Her punishment was already underway, and Henry knew he'd never be the same. Henry Caldwell felt like he was stuck in an endless maze of guilt and despair. Claire had succeeded in making him experience what it felt like to lose control. The weeks after Claire's revelation were unbearable. He was no longer the confident, cocky man who thought he held all the power. Now, he was just a shell of his former self. Every time he tried to talk to Claire, she responded with cold silence, completely ignoring him. Her indifference was slowly destroying him from the inside out. He couldn't sleep anymore, his mind consumed with the desire to fix what he had shattered. But the weight of the truth and the consequences of his actions made that seem almost impossible. Still, something began to shift within Henry. He realized that words weren't going to cut it anymore. Apologies had lost their meaning. Claire needed to see real change, authentic transformation, and Henry was prepared to do whatever it took to prove that to her. It wasn't about promises. It was about action. One morning, Henry woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that asking for forgiveness wouldn't be enough. He had to take a different approach. The first thing he decided to do was give Claire space. She needed to know that he respected her time and wouldn't push her anymore. At the same time, he knew he needed to show her in small but meaningful ways that he was still there. Henry began to focus on the little things that made up Claire's daily life. He paid attention to her routines, her preferences, and her interests. He didn't chase after her or invade her space, but he made sure to remember all the little things. She adored flowers, particularly peonies. Her coffee was always strong, no sugar, every single morning. These small details that once seemed unimportant were now his way of trying to reconnect with her. That afternoon, Henry visited a top-notch florist in town and bought a bouquet of peonies, but he didn't plan to hand them to Claire directly. He knew she would turn them down right away. Instead, he left them on the kitchen table, no card attached. It was simple, but carried meaning. Henry anxiously waited while Claire took her usual walk. When she returned, she found the bouquet. She didn't say a word, but Henry, watching from the corner of his eye, saw her pause in front of the flowers. Her face remained unchanged, but he noticed when she lifted one flower and took in its scent. It was a small move, but to Henry, it was a sign. She hadn't completely dismissed the gesture. It was a step forward. Over the next few days, Henry kept up these subtle acts. He'd quietly set the breakfast table, making sure her coffee was just the way she liked it, and then leave, careful not to impose. He left little things he knew she enjoyed where she could easily find them, all without pushing for interaction. Gradually, he was showing her that he had changed, that he was paying attention, and that he genuinely wanted to take care of her. But Claire wasn't budging. She kept up her guard, and Henry knew breaking through that barrier would take patience. Still, he was determined not to quit. He was committed to proving he had changed and was ready to win her back, on her terms, respecting the space she needed. Then, on a particularly chilly night, something shifted. Claire sat on the balcony, bundled up in a blanket, gazing out at the city lights. After a few moments of hesitation, Henry approached her. He offered her a cup of hot tea, knowing she liked something warm before bed. "Here, I thought you might like something to warm you up," he said gently, making sure not to push his presence on her. Claire didn't respond at first, but accepted the cup, her eyes still fixed on the city below. Henry stood quietly beside her, simply being there without forcing anything. The silence between them was heavy, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel unbearable. It felt like something was shifting, even if the change was subtle. "Why are you doing this, Henry?" Claire finally broke the silence, her tone gentle yet steady. Henry recognized this as his moment to speak, but he knew he had to tread carefully. He took a deep breath before answering. "Because I realized that just talking isn't enough anymore." His eyes wandered to the horizon, shared with her. "My words don't mean much. Not after what I've done. Apologies won't fix it. But I'm trying to show you, I'm changing. I want to be better, not just for you, but because I know I need to be." Claire stayed quiet for a few moments, still clutching her cup of tea. Although some of the tension appeared to ease, the cool breeze swept by them. "You can't undo the past, Henry," she finally said, her voice softer than he anticipated. "I know," he answered honestly, "but I can make the future different." For the first time that night, Claire turned to face him, and Henry noticed something had shifted in her expression. The wall she had built wasn't completely down, but there was a hint of curiosity. He knew she wasn't ready to forgive him fully, but this moment felt important. He had touched on something she might be open to believing. In the days that followed, Henry continued with small gestures, and there was a new kind of energy between them. Claire still maintained her distance, but she didn't push him away like before. She accepted the flowers and the tea, and even allowed brief conversations during breakfast, although they remained light and surface level. Slowly, her walls seemed to come down, even if just a little. The true test came one evening, when Henry was preparing to leave for a meeting. Dressed and ready for his business appointment, Claire entered the room with an unreadable expression. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked suddenly. Henry blinked, caught off guard. She had never shown interest in their fractured relationship before. He paused, then quickly nodded, grabbing his phone to cancel the meeting without hesitation. It was the first time in weeks Claire had seemed open to spending time together, and he wasn't about to let that slip by. They sat on the couch, still leaving some space between them, but for the first time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Claire sat quietly, her expression reflecting the weight of everything that had unfolded over the last few months. "I'm not ready to fully forgive you," she finally said, breaking the silence. "But I can see you're trying to show me something different." Henry's heart pounded. He knew he couldn't rush her, but Claire's words gave him a spark of hope. He understood the path ahead was still long, but he was willing to take every step if it meant regaining her trust, and maybe even her love. The evening carried on calmly as they chatted about small, insignificant things. Yet for Henry, it felt like a win. Slowly, but surely, he was rebuilding their connection with patience. Claire was no longer untouchable. She was starting to lower her defenses, and Henry was determined not to make the same mistake of underestimating her. However, a lingering uncertainty hung over them. Henry sensed Claire was still holding back, not revealing everything. He knew he had to be ready for whatever might come next. For the moment, the fact that Claire was open to talking was enough for him. The weeks that followed were filled with a delicate balance of tension and hope. For the first time in what felt like ages, Henry believed he was making real progress with her. She no longer treated him with outright coldness, but there was still a barrier between them. It was as if she was waiting for something, and that made Henry anxious. He knew he was being tested, and he was prepared to face it head-on. What Henry didn't realize was that something much bigger was on the horizon. He threw himself into proving to Claire that he had changed, cutting back on work to spend more time at home, being present for her without pushing too hard for answers. They shared small moments, like making breakfast together or having light conversations about random topics. Claire's icy demeanor had thawed, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. Despite their progress, it seemed like Claire was still holding on to a secret. She stayed guarded at certain times, steering clear of deeper conversations about their past or where they were headed. It felt like she was waiting for the right moment to say something important, but Henry had no idea what it could be. Then, one quiet night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows of their apartment, Henry noticed a shift in Claire's mood. She seemed more withdrawn than usual, lost in her thoughts. He tried to give her space, but his curiosity gnawed at him. What was she hiding? What hadn't been said yet? The silence grew too heavy, and Henry knew he had to break through it. "Claire," Henry started, his voice barely above a whisper, laced with uncertainty. "I know there's something you're still not telling me. I can sense it." He fixed his eyes on hers, hoping for a response, even the slightest hint. "Please, if there's anything left unsaid, I need to know." Claire, seated on the couch with her hands resting in her lap, exhaled slowly, her gaze avoiding Henry's. The silence that stretched between them was unbearable, but Henry knew better than to push. He had come too far to risk undoing the fragile trust they had rebuilt. Finally, her eyes met his, filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. "You're right, Henry," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been keeping something from you. Something I didn't think I could ever tell you. Until now. But maybe it's time." Henry felt his chest tighten, knowing that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything between them. He leaned in, his stomach knotting with anticipation, bracing himself for whatever was coming next. "Do you remember the company you destroyed? The one my father was running?" Claire asked, her voice firm, though her face showed her pain. "I told you that you ruined our family, and that's true. But it wasn't just our family that you destroyed." Henry frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low, laced with worry. Claire dropped her gaze again, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I was pregnant, Henry." Those words hit Henry like a freight train. He blinked in disbelief, struggling to comprehend what she had just said. "What?" he managed, his voice hoarse. "I was pregnant when everything happened," Claire continued, her eyes still downcast. "And when we lost everything, when my father was gone, the stress, the pressure, I lost the baby." Henry felt like the world had fallen out from under him. He could hardly catch his breath. The weight of her words crushed him, a blow far worse than anything he had expected. The guilt he had carried for weeks now felt insurmountable, suffocating him completely. He hadn't just ruined a company or even a family. He had wrecked a life. "Claire," he tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. "I didn't know." His voice was strained, heavy with regret. "I never could have imagined." She finally turned to face him, tears she had been holding back now spilling down her cheeks. She had a remarkable strength about her despite the grief that was obscuring her face. "No, you didn't know," Claire said, her tone sharp with pain and anger, "because you never bothered to care. You wrecked lives, Henry. You bulldozed through, and I was left in the wreckage. I lost my baby, and you just kept moving forward like nothing ever happened." Her words pierced Henry like daggers. He wanted to say something, anything, that could mend the damage he had caused, but he knew deep down that nothing could undo what Claire had gone through. "I don't have the right words," Henry finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with sorrow. I realize what I did is beyond forgiveness, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But please, Claire, I'll do anything to try and make amends. Claire studied him in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. Henry was acutely aware that no apology could bring the baby back or change the past, but he was desperate to ease some of the hurt Claire carried. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath, her eyes closing as if she were making a tough decision. When she opened them again, her expression had shifted. The pain lingered, but there was something else, something Henry couldn't quite name. I'm not sure I can forgive you, Henry, she said softly, her honesty striking deep. What happened? What you did? It was earth-shattering. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But I can see you're trying, and maybe, just maybe, one day I'll find a way to move forward. But it's not going to be quick, and it won't be easy. Henry nodded, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the despair. The journey ahead would be a hard one, but at least Claire was open to the idea of a future where things could be different. I'll do whatever it takes, Henry said firmly, determination edging his voice. No matter how long it takes, I'll prove that I've changed, that I can be someone you trust again, someone you could maybe, someday, forgive. Claire looked at him, and for the first time, there was a tiny glimmer of possibility. It wasn't forgiveness, and it didn't erase the pain, but it was something. It was a start. We'll see, Claire murmured softly. We'll see if you can. The silence between them hung in the air, heavy with unspoken thoughts, yet somehow brimming with potential. Claire rose from her seat and walked toward the door, leaving Henry sitting alone on the couch. But this time, he didn't feel the same crushing despair he once had. He realized there was a long road ahead, but now, at least, he had hope. The days following Claire's confession were transformative for Henry. Every word she had spoken lingered in his thoughts, reminding him of the hurt he had caused. But instead of letting the guilt drag him down, Henry chose to let it drive him toward becoming a better person. Winning Claire's love back wasn't enough. He wanted to become someone worthy of her respect and the respect of those he had wronged in his ruthless business career. That morning, Henry made up his mind. He wouldn't let the mistakes of his past define him forever. He would make amends, starting with repairing the damage he had done. Henry started reaching out to the families whose lives his business decisions had ruined in an effort to demonstrate that his change was genuine. His first stop was the home of an old rival whose company he had crushed years before. He arrived unannounced, knocking on the door of a modest house in a neighborhood far removed from the luxury he was used to. The man who opened the door didn't recognize Henry, but the hurt in his eyes was all too familiar. "I'm Henry Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity he barely recognized in himself. "I'm here to apologize." The man stared at him in disbelief, then let out a bitter laugh. "Apologize? What's that going to fix now?" "I can't undo the past," Henry responded firmly. "But I can help rebuild the future. I'm here to offer compensation for the harm I caused." In the weeks that followed, Henry continued his journey toward redemption. He knocked on doors and met families face to face, offering not just financial support, but his time and effort to fully grasp the impact of his actions. He began donating large amounts to struggling small businesses, setting up programs to help them recover from his previous corporate strategies. Claire watched him from a distance. She was cautious, not quick to trust the changes she saw. She knew Henry was trying, but forgiveness wasn't something she could offer easily. As time went by, Claire began to notice a real change in Henry. And with that came unexpected feelings of respect and admiration. He was different now, and his actions showed that his promises were no longer just empty words. One evening, while Claire stood on the balcony gazing at the city lights, Henry quietly joined her. He had just returned from another visit to make amends, and there was a new calmness in his expression, a sense of determination. "How did it go today?" Claire asked, her eyes still fixed on the distant skyline. Henry exhaled deeply, his sigh carrying the weight of months of effort and regret. "It was tough," he admitted, "but it needed to be done. Every conversation, every apology, it's helping me become a better person. Not just for you, Claire, but for myself too." Claire finally turned to face him. Her look had changed as well. The harshness she had clung to, the anger she had carried, seemed to have eased. In that moment, she saw that Henry was truly evolving. He was no longer the arrogant man who had entered her life with a foolish bet. He was someone working hard to change, someone willing to fight for their future together. "I can see that, Henry," Claire said, her tone soft yet resolute. "And I want you to know that I'm ready to try. Maybe it's time we leave the past behind and create something new." A wave of relief washed over Henry, one he hadn't even realized he was holding on to. Her words meant more to him than he could have imagined. Claire was willing to give them a real chance, not as a couple forced together by circumstance, but as two people who wanted to start fresh. As their 6-month marriage agreement neared its end, something unexpected happened. Claire and Henry grew closer. Their conversations became more relaxed and less tense. They shared moments of laughter, of connection. Slowly, love started to bloom in a way neither of them had anticipated. No longer were they two strangers locked in an arranged marriage. They were two individuals getting to know each other for real. On the final night of their 6 months, Henry planned a special dinner, knowing this moment would define everything. They had come so far, and he didn't want the marriage to end just yet. During dinner, Henry spoke nervously, his voice carrying a weight he hadn't expected. "Claire, I know our arrangement is almost over, but I don't want this to be the end for us. I don't want us to end. I've fallen for you, Claire, deeply, and I want to continue this, but as a real couple. No more bets, no more games." Claire looked at him, her heart unexpectedly warmed by his words, though his honesty took her by surprise. She realized something had quietly changed in her too. Over the past few weeks, her feelings for him had grown. What started as two people at odds had become something real. "I love you too, Henry," she said, her voice calm but steady. "I want to try this, as equals, as a real couple." In that moment, pure happiness filled the air. They had conquered obstacles that once felt impossible, and now they were ready to move forward together. Months passed, and soon Claire began to notice changes in her body. Morning nausea crept in, something unfamiliar to her. A visit to the doctor confirmed it. She was pregnant. When Claire shared the news with Henry, his reaction was full of joy. He hugged her tight, laughing and crying at the same time. All the challenges, the heartache, had led them to this moment of renewal. They were about to start a new chapter, with a baby on the way. "I want to do things right this time," Henry said, knowing what he had to do. "I want to marry you again. But for real this time, not because of a bet or anything else, just because I love you and want to spend my life with you." Claire smiled, her own tears of joy mixing with his. "I want that too, Henry." This time, it was a real wedding, a simple, intimate ceremony with only their closest friends and family. No flashy displays, no business deals or bets hanging over their heads. just Claire and Henry, united by love and prepared to face the future together. Henry knew he had a lot to prove, not just to Claire, but to himself and the families he had let down before. Now, he had something worth fighting for, a future with the woman he loved and the child they were expecting. As they danced at the end of the night, Claire rested her head against Henry's chest and softly said, "Who would have thought all this started with a bet?" Henry smiled, holding her close. "Who would have thought it'd turn out to be the best bet I ever made?" With love, redemption, and hope ahead of them, they were ready for the next chapter in their lives. What about you? Do you think Claire made the right choice in forgiving and marrying Henry? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement means the world to us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Thanks for watching.